The sun had barely risen over the small frontier town of Dry Hollow when Sheriff Eli Granger brought in the young native girl. Her name was Wiaka, though the townsfolk just called her that Indian girl. She hadn't committed any crime, but Eli said it was for her own protection. Trouble had been brewing between the townsfolk and nearby tribes, and Wiaka had been found wandering the edge of town, barefoot and alone. Eli feared what angry settlers might do if they saw her again. He meant well, but chains clanked louder than good intentions. Wiaka sat quietly on the cot in the single cell, her gaze unshaken. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She simply waited. The sheriff brought her water and stew, but she barely touched it. To her, this wasn't protection, it was a cage. And outside those bars, misunderstandings were sharpening like knives in the hands of scared men. By midday, word had spread. "Sheriff's got an Indian girl locked up," whispered old men on porches and housewives by the well. Some feared retaliation, others saw it as justice. No one asked why. But a pair of keen eyes were already watching from the woods beyond town, eyes that recognized the blue shawl Wiaka wore. 30 miles north, in the winter camp of the Lakota, the word came like thunder. Wiaka has been taken. The blue shawl she wore was a gift from the tribal elder. To them, this wasn't protection. It was kidnapping. And where diplomacy failed in the past, fire often followed. They didn't yell. They didn't curse. They simply saddled up. 12 of them, cloaked in furs and war paint, riding south in silence, cutting through the snow like ghosts. They weren't coming to negotiate. They were coming for their daughter. That evening, as the sheriff lit his pipe outside the jail, Wiaka finally spoke. "You locked me away like I was the danger," she said softly. Eli turned. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. "What are you protecting me from, Sheriff? Them or you?" Just past midnight, a shadowy figure stepped into town square and nailed a wooden carving to the sheriff's office door. A feather wrapped in sinew, the tribe's silent warning. The warriors were close, and their patience thin. Sheriff Eli stood at the door for hours, staring at the carving. He knew what it meant. He wanted to believe what he did was right, but rightness feels hollow when it's built on someone else's silence. He had to make a choice, and fast. Sheriff Turner's night was interrupted by the distant howling of wolves, but something about the stillness that followed made his skin crawl. He rose from his chair with a rifle in hand and stepped onto the front porch of the jailhouse. Shadows moved at the tree line. Not animals, people. Silent, watching. The tribe had found them. He didn't raise his weapon. He couldn't. He could feel their sorrow and anger from across the darkness. A warning drumbeat in the distance told him. They thought he was the enemy. Inside, Nina didn't speak. She just sat silently, watching the doorway, her eyes knowing. And Sheriff Turner, standing alone against the moonlit trees, realized this was not going to be a negotiation. By morning, the tension hadn't broken. Turner hadn't slept. Just before dawn, an elder from the tribe approached, unarmed, walking with grace and pain. His name was White Elk, and he spoke through silence until Nina emerged to greet him. The elder placed his hand gently on Nina's forehead, murmuring something in a language the sheriff didn't understand. Then he looked at Turner, not with hatred but deep disappointment. "You kept her locked away. You kept her from her people. And for that, we grieved as if she had died." The sheriff tried to explain that she had been chased by dangerous men, that he'd saved her. But White Elk only said, "You hid her in iron when she needed shelter and arms." Sheriff Turner stood at a crossroads, literal and moral. The elder had offered him a choice, release Nina into their custody or risk their wrath. But Turner didn't fear them. He feared failing her. She wasn't just some girl. She had trusted him, leaned on him, and yet her gaze was fixed on her people, on the tree line where they waited with open arms and heavy hearts. Her silence was not resentment, it was longing. Finally, Turner stepped aside. "You're free, Nina," he said quietly. "Go home." She hesitated, just long enough to press a small carved bird into his hand, her thanks. Then she ran. That night, fires burned on the ridge where the tribe had gathered. Songs of return, of mourning, of resilience echoed through the canyon. Turner watched from a distance, seated alone on the jailhouse roof. He could hear the elders' words again, about iron and arms, about grief, about misunderstanding. He didn't regret letting her go. But he questioned how many others had been protected into prison cells, how many had died before someone asked why they were running in the first place. Just as peace settled in Turner's heart, the riders returned. The same bounty hunters who had chased Nina to the edge of town. This time they weren't looking for her. They were looking for vengeance. "She got away because of you," the leader spat. "You made us look weak." Turner stood his ground. The town had seen enough lies wearing badges. "You come through this jail door," he warned. "You won't walk back through it." Gunfire cracked across the dirt street like thunder. Turner was outnumbered but not outmatched. He moved with the precision of a man who'd fought for peace too long to let it die now. The townspeople, at first hidden, began to step forward. A shopkeeper threw a rifle. A blacksmith stood beside Turner. One by one they formed a wall. Weeks passed. The jailhouse stood quieter. The sheriff, older somehow. But then came a quiet knock. Nina stood there, alone, older in the eyes, carrying a bundle of herbs and a letter from the tribe. "They said I should say thank you, for not keeping me, for seeing me." Turner didn't smile, he just nodded. "You were never mine to keep, just mine to protect." Turner built a bench by the jailhouse tree. On its back he carved her name, not as a prisoner, but as a visitor who changed everything. Townsfolk started sitting there, reading the carving, asking who she was. "She's the girl who taught me that law and justice ain't always the same thing," he'd say. And that was enough. Nina's story became more than rumor, it became part of the town's spirit. A story whispered to children, a tale of wisdom, courage, and mercy. Turner didn't correct the details, he just kept that bird carving on his desk. A reminder of a moment when he chose compassion over command. One spring, White Elk returned, just to sit with Turner under the tree. He brought tobacco, stories, and no bitterness. "She speaks of you often," he said. "You are remembered not as the man who caged her, but as the man who listened." And in Turner's world, that was the highest honor. Years later, long after Turner had hung up his badge, a letter arrived from Nina, written in graceful cursive. She was a healer now, helping children, rebuilding lost bridges. "I was never lost," she wrote, "only waiting to be understood." Nina's story eventually reached further than any gunshot or badge. Laws were re-examined, judges asked more questions, and young sheriffs told her story around fires. Because sometimes, to protect someone, you don't need a key. You need to open a door and let them walk through it on their own.